You're sitting at the dinner table, food's getting cold, you're halfway through a sentence, and your Border Collie is just there, still, unblinking, watching you with an intensity that doesn't quite fit the word pet. Most people laugh it off. Some find it genuinely unsettling. A surprising number of Border Collie owners have typed some version of "why does my dog stare at me like that" into a search bar at 11 p.m., half convinced something is wrong. Nothing is wrong, but almost everything you've assumed about that stare probably is. What you're looking at isn't obsession. It isn't dominance. It isn't your dog being strange or intense or a lot. What you're looking at is one of the most sophisticated biological communication systems in the entire animal kingdom, running in real time, pointed directly at your face. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what your Border Collie is processing every time those eyes lock onto you, and why understanding it changes the entire relationship. Welcome to Collie Mind, where we don't do generic dog advice. We do the real psychology of this specific, extraordinary breed. That stare didn't show up by accident. It was built into the Border Collie through more than 200 years of deliberate selective breeding on the hill farms and working trials of the British Isles. Farmers and shepherds weren't just selecting for dogs that could run or respond to whistles. They were selecting for a very specific, almost eerie capacity, the ability to control the movement of livestock using nothing but stillness and gaze. To understand why that matters, you need to know about something called the predatory motor sequence. Every dog on Earth carries a version of it, the behavioral chain inherited from wolves that goes orient, stalk, eye, chase, grab, kill. In most breeds, selective breeding amplified one or two parts of that chain. Retrievers got the chase and the carry, terriers got the grab and the shake. But in the Border Collie, breeders did something neurologically unique. They took the sequence and froze it midway through. The Border Collie orients. It stalks, it eyes, and then it stops. The chase doesn't complete. The grab never comes. The sequence runs right up to the edge of its natural release point and then holds there, suspended, under pressure. That frozen moment, that unblinking, low-bodied, locked-in stare, is what shepherds called the eye. And for generations, dogs who had the strongest, most sustained eye were the most prized working animals on the hillside, because that gaze alone could stop a sheep, turn a flock, hold 200 animals in formation without a single step forward. Here's what makes this neurologically significant. In wolves, the predatory motor sequence has a terminal point. It ends in a kill and the neurological tension releases. In the Border Collie, that terminal point was selectively removed. So the sequence fires and holds, with nowhere to go. This is why the stare feels compulsive, because it is. Your Border Collie isn't choosing to stare at you the way you choose to look at something across a room. The motor program activates and it runs. The dog is, in a very real sense, caught inside it. And there's a second layer to this. The act of controlling movement through gaze triggers a dopamine response in the Border Collie's brain. Not the outcome, not the sheep turning, not the ball being thrown. The act itself, the holding, the control. The stare is neurologically rewarding in its own right, which is why a Border Collie will lock onto a stationary ball and stare at it for 10, 15, 20 minutes. They're not waiting for something exciting to happen. The predatory motor sequence is running at full intensity, and the brain is being rewarded for sustaining it. Watch your dog the next time they go still before you throw something. That isn't anticipation the way you experience anticipation. That is a 200-year-old motor program, firing exactly as it was bred to fire, waiting for the movement cue that tells it the sequence can advance. So that's where the stare comes from, not habit, not personality, not intensity for its own sake. But what is it actually doing when it locks onto you specifically? Not a ball, not a child sprinting across the yard, not a bird at the window. You. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Because when your Border Collie's eyes lock onto you specifically, something different is happening, something that goes well beyond the predatory wiring we just walked through. The stare shifts function. It becomes a scan. Think about what Border Collies were actually bred to do out on a working hillside. They didn't run alongside their handler. They worked at a distance, sometimes hundreds of meters away, moving sheep across terrain the handler couldn't even reach. Which means the dog had to read instructions from a human body they could barely hear. A slight lean to the left, a lifted hand, a shift in weight from one foot to the other. These weren't supplementary signals, they were the whole language. Verbal cues came later, and even then, the body was primary. What that created, over generations of selecting for dogs who could read a human at distance with near-perfect accuracy, is a visual processing system tuned to human movement at a resolution no other breed comes close to matching. Your face, to your Border Collie, isn't just a face. It's a control panel they've been reading since the moment they met you, and they're better at it than you are at reading your own expressions. When those eyes are on you, your Border Collie is pulling micro-expressions off your face before you're conscious of making them. They're tracking your posture, your breathing rhythm, the angle of your shoulders, the tension around your eyes. They're doing this continuously, updating a real-time picture of your emotional state with each pass. This is what researchers studying herding breed cognition describe as cortisol synchrony, the documented tendency for Border Collies and similar breeds to absorb and mirror their handler's stress state faster and more completely than almost any other domestic animal. The stare is part of the mechanism. They can't sync to you without reading you first. And here's where it gets genuinely remarkable. Your Border Collie isn't just tracking your current state, they're building a predictive model of you, a behavioral map that gets more detailed every single day. They know which sequence of movements means you're about to leave the house, and they know it before you pick up your keys, because they've already clocked the shoes, the jacket, the change in your walking pace through the kitchen. They know you're about to stand up from the couch before your weight shifts, because they've logged the micro-tension that precedes that movement hundreds of times. Have you ever shifted slightly in your chair and watched your Border Collie's head tilt before you've done anything else? That's not coincidence, and it's not some vague sixth sense. That's prediction based on a dataset they've been building about you since day one. The stare is how they maintain and update it. This is also what separates the stare directed at you from the stare directed at a ball or a running child. Both draw on that predatory motor sequence we covered earlier, but the stare aimed at you carries something else, an emotional dimension, a checking-in quality that's deeply specific to the Border Collie's bond with their human. Livestock don't have feelings your dog needs to track. A ball doesn't have a stress response worth monitoring. You do. And to a Border Collie, your inner state isn't your private business. It's information they need to do their job. That's not an intrusion. It's a form of attention that most humans will never receive from any other living thing. Your Border Collie knows your emotional weather better than most people in your life do, and they care about it in a way that is, given their neurology, completely involuntary. Now this is where the Border Collie diverges completely from every other breed, because what they're doing with all that data isn't just tracking, it's something closer to a question. So your Border Collie is running a predatory motor sequence that has no release point, scanning your face at a level of detail most humans never achieve with each other, and building a predictive model of your behavior that updates every time you move. All of that is happening, and underneath all of it, there's a single message being transmitted. I need a function. Give me a role in what's happening right now. The Border Collie brain wasn't built for stillness. It was built for continuous decision-making, the kind that happens when you're managing 200 sheep across a hillside in real time, reading the flock, reading the terrain, reading your handler, adjusting every few seconds. That cognitive load isn't something the BC brain tolerates in the absence of. It's something the BC brain requires. Rest for this breed isn't a neutral state. It's a neurologically costly one. The brain keeps running whether there's anything to run on or not. When your Border Collie stares at you from across the room, that's often what you're seeing. A brain at full operational capacity with nowhere to direct the output. The stare is the visible surface of that pressure. It's the healthiest version of the request. What happens when that request goes unanswered, not once but repeatedly over days and weeks, is where things get harder to watch. The brain finds its own work, shadow chasing, fixation on light reflections moving across the wall, compulsive circling. These aren't personality problems, and they aren't random. They're what happens when a high-functioning cognitive system is left to generate its own stimulation because the environment stopped providing any. By the time most owners notice something is wrong, the dog has been asking for a long time. There are two versions of the stare worth knowing how to tell apart. The working stare is focused and still. The dog is watching you, waiting, holding the motor sequence in check because they're anticipating a cue. There's tension in it, but it's organized tension. The same quality you'd see in that dog on a hillside waiting for the whistle. The distress stare is different. It's paired with pacing, with escalating arousal, with a dog that stares and then moves and then stares again because the circuit keeps running and nothing is completing. If you're seeing the second version regularly, the conversation has already been going on longer than you realized. The thing is, your Border Collie doesn't need a sheep field. That's a common misconception, that this breed requires a working farm to function. What they need is structurally simpler than that, but it can't be skipped. They need a task with a clear shape, a defined role, and a human who actually responds when the request comes in. Studies on herding breed welfare consistently show that cognitive engagement, tasks that require the dog to make choices and read their handler, brings cortisol levels down more effectively than physical exercise alone. A long run helps. It doesn't satisfy the same need. The task itself can be small, carrying something on a walk, waiting at a threshold until you release them, learning a new cue that requires them to problem solve. What matters neurologically isn't the scale of the job. It's the structure of it, the clear beginning, the clear role, the human responding at the other end. When your Border Collie stares at you before a walk, before you set down their food, before anything, they're not being pushy. They're asking to participate in the shape of your shared life. They're asking for the thing their entire nervous system was built around, a partnership where the human is present, responsive, and worth reading. That's not a demand, that's an invitation. What the stare is really saying, the stare is never one thing. That's the part that's easy to miss if you're looking for a single clean explanation. At any given moment when those eyes lock onto you, your Border Collie is running multiple processes simultaneously. The predatory motor sequence is holding, waiting for a movement cue. The cortisol sink is active, pulling your emotional state into their nervous system and responding to it. The predictive model is updating, logging whatever small shift you just made in your posture or breathing. And underneath all of it, the attachment bond is doing what it always does, orienting your dog toward you the way a compass orients toward north. These aren't separate forces taking turns, they stack, they run together, and what comes out the other side is that gaze. When a Border Collie whose stare gets consistently ignored, or laughed off, or corrected, doesn't learn to stop staring. What they actually learn is that the communication channel doesn't work, and a dog who concludes that their primary signal to their primary person isn't landing doesn't go quiet. They escalate. The shadow chasing gets worse. The compulsive behaviors that looked manageable start consuming more of the day. Not because the dog became a problem, but because the dog stopped believing the direct route was available and started finding other ways to manage the pressure that creates. This breed was built for attentive, continuous partnership, not intermittently, not when it's convenient, continuously. The stare is the most unambiguous expression of that need, direct, sustained, impossible to misread once you understand what it's carrying. It's not intensity for its own sake, it's not a dominance display. It's connection, framed the only way 200 years of selective breeding left available. So next time those eyes find you across the room, don't look away, don't laugh, don't correct, look back, hold it for a second. Then give them something small to do, a cue, a task, anything with a clear shape. That exchange, that moment where your Border Collie sends a signal and you actually receive it, is what this dog was made for. It's the whole thing, compressed into a few seconds. The genetics, the predatory sequence, the data processing, the emotional bond. In your Border Collie, none of these operate in isolation. They're one system, and the stare is where you see all of it running at once. That dog watching you fold laundry isn't being strange. They're working. They're reading you, waiting for you, staying connected to the person their entire psychology is organized around. This is what Collie Mind is here for. Not generic dog content, but the real psychology of this specific breed. If this changed how you see that stare, share it with every Border Collie handler who's ever typed "Why does my dog watch me like that?" into a search bar at midnight. They deserve to know.